If you enjoy listening to The Edge, support them by subscribing to The Edge on iTunes, Stitcher, and you can listen through the iHeartRadio app. Get busy listening.
You're listening to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
Hi, this is Mark, and welcome. Interesting thing happened on this episode. Michael Shore, who we normally kick off the show with for the Fast 15, politics, and more, he is away on assignment. And I asked Ben Mankiewicz, who's one of the founders of the Young Turks, which is the largest online news network in the world, the TYT Network, and he's the host of Turner Classic Movies, TCM. I asked him to fill in just for the first part of the show, and we end up having a conversation that talks about Ben, talks about classic movies, and then we do segue into politics and a post-State of the Union dissection of what's going on in Washington and the political futures of a couple of key people. And before I knew it, it's the whole episode. I think you'll love the conversation. So Ben Mankiewicz is here from TCM, from TYT. Thanks those of you who have gone to iTunes and left us a 1 or 2 word review even, like the show, listen to the show, catch it when I can, 5 stars, and even a word or 2 does matter. It keeps us toward the top of the queues in the iTunes universe and the universe of podcasts. All of you, whenever you get a chance to rate us with a thumbs up or whatever it is, it really does help the show. We are on YouTube. I've only mentioned it once before, I think. So you can subscribe to us on YouTube, The Edge with Mark Thompson on YouTube as well. Look, I very much appreciate however you support our show. I appreciate the downloads. I appreciate the subscriptions. I appreciate as well you shopping through our Amazon click-through. If you click on an episode, you'll see an Amazon banner. Click on that. If you're going to shop on Amazon anyway, please do it through our site. We get a little piece of whatever you spend, and it helps support the show. Or a couple of you have left us something on our virtual tip jar. Wow, really cool and really appreciate it. And all the money, every dollar, stays with this podcast and paying the people who help put this show on. So it's Ben Mankiewicz from Turner Classic Movies and the Young Turks, or TYT Network. Let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage it means.
They let guys just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
We are honored to have from TCM and the Young Turks, Ben Mankiewicz, everyone.
Thanks. Always good to be here. I'm not here as often as I thought I'd be here.
Yeah, I was hoping. It's tough. You're very busy. I mean, how often you work for TCM back east, right? Isn't that where most of that stuff
I go
is?
for a week, a month, basically, to Atlanta. Sometimes full 5 days, sometimes 4, but 5 certainly with a travel day. And then and then there's the week before going to TCM is almost a full-time week of preparation, and frequently 2 weeks before. So. And then I have like 4 other things. Young Turks, one of them. So, and just the number of times it's good. It's good to be wanted. But I have trouble finding time to do anything that I like doing. I'm not even gambling as much as I used to.
Wow.
Not because I'm cutting back. It's just when you're too busy to gamble.
You need to reassess.
That's right. That's right.
Let me go back to the TCM prep, because people who see TCM, they see you smiling and making a couple of smart-ass comments and then some insights before and after a movie. And they think, well, what prep's involved in that? Seems pretty straightforward.
So keep in mind, I'll do in a given week, depending on what other programming we had, somewhere between 90s movies. So then that's an intro and an outro generally. So 180 different items, right? 180 different segments, and sometimes up to 120 or 130, so as many as 260.
And you have to sort of rewrite those, or
I rewrite every one of them. So they send them to me, hopefully, at least 3 weeks out. Sometimes it's only 2 weeks, and you have to sort of, and then I make changes, and then they get sent back, and then they have to go back through research to make sure I didn't get anything wrong, or they didn't get anything wrong in the first pass, and sometimes, of course, we do. I get, my confusion of Richard Lester and Richard Fleischer was legendary there.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Only one of them worked with the Beatles. And I had a whole thing. So, yeah, you just, you zone out on stuff. You get, when you write a lot, it's mistakes that you don't think you could possibly make, you end up making.
Wait. What's a mistake you didn't think you could possibly make?
Well, I mean, getting Richard Lester and Richard Fleischer confused,
okay.
Certainly. You get into your head and you start writing, you do all this research and you're writing about Jean Arthur because she's in this movie and this is cool, but she'd worked on the 3 Capra films. It was a peculiar choice for her to make necessarily after the 3 Capra films in the 1930s. And then you're like, Jean Arthur's not in this movie, right? And you've just spent 47 minutes with this really cool stuff. And theoretically, you could file it away and use it again, but that never happened.
What's wild to me is that you're dealing with stuff that you didn't grow up with. These are classic movies. Let me contrast it to the guy who was sort of the king of TCM, Turner Classic Movies. Robert Osborne did grow up with a lot of those movies. I mean,
and didn't just grow up with a lot of those movies, grew up with a lot of those stars. I mean, close friends with Bette Davis, close friends with Lucille Ball.
So when, this young guy comes along who's just sort of hearing about these movies, I'm guessing you hadn't seen most of these films.
And there's a presumption because of the family name and the fact that the Mankiewiczes were so important in Hollywood through, the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, that I grew up with that. But that I grew up in D.C. in the political wing of the family. And while aware of the significance of the family, I didn't appreciate it. It was just something that other part of the family did. My father's father and the people in L.A., we lived in D.C. So, no, everything came late. Incredibly late. First classic movie that meant anything to me, North by Northwest, at age 16. My mom forced me to watch it. And also, this is another thing about memory. So she gets me to watch North by Northwest. She says, you're going to like this one. Trust me. And so I remember it being the first black and white movie that I ever liked. But it
wasn't in black and white.
It's not in black and white. But that memory is seared into my head.
That's funny.
That's
great.
And we did. It's not like we watched it. We watched it downstairs. It was a color television. It was in color.
No, I was going to go maybe that way with it.
No. It was. We watched it. I remember everything about watching it with her. It's just in my head. It's in black and white. So another thing about why eyewitness testimony is unreliable, because I'm positive. I was positive that I was living and working in Miami when in Miami Beach and South Beach when Gianni Versace was murdered, and then I start watching the show and he was murdered in 1997. I got there in 1998. I was not there.
Wow.
But I would have said, oh man, it was weird. I walked by it the next day. But no, I didn't. I didn't live there. Yeah. Wow. I arrived 10 months later and did walk by it then. And there must have still been flowers there, and some, tourists would still put flowers there.
Yeah. And you pasted those memories together.
I just pasted those memories together. That's right. So, we're wrong about stuff. Yeah. Wow. And so that's when I start researching. I'll just have something in my head. I'm like, this William Holden stuff is great. And then it's not, William Holden's not in this movie.
You talk about your family name, that Mankiewicz name. Herman Mankiewicz wrote what was and is considered one of the great movies of all time, if not the greatest movie of all time, Citizen Kane. And he's your grandfather. When you ultimately do come out to Hollywood and the name is separated a bit from politics and more quickly associated with show business.
Yeah.
You've mentioned to me before that literally you'll be at a party and some big star comes over and they're
It was the host of the party. Although it happens with stars. But when I was visiting, I was 21 years old, so still not in any way a full appreciation. I was here, like in between my junior and senior years of college. I came out here for 2 weeks, stayed with my cousin John Mankiewicz, who's a writer. And I got invited by somebody else to a party, like probably my cousin, Tim Davis, who's a Mankiewicz but doesn't have the last name. His mom was a Mankiewicz. And I'm at the party and I get introduced as Ben Mankiewicz, and the host clapped their heels together and bowed and said Hollywood royalty. I'm probably remembering that story wrong too. That probably didn't happen, but I've told the story so many times that now officially. Anyway, but I do know the host said Hollywood royalty. I know those words came out. And I thought, who are they talking about? I look behind me, is Wally Capra walking in, but no, they meant me and they meant that family. So that was an early it's a big deal out here. But, my brother lived out here and he didn't live out here then, but I didn't quite put that together.
Well, your brother, maybe just because of the circles you ran in, I think he ran in more of a news kind of circle.
Yeah, and I definitely run in now the sort of, and many, including many of some older Hollywood stars who knew not Herman so much, because Herman died in 1953, although certainly our friend Norman Lloyd knew Herman. But there are plenty of people alive who I meet who knew Joe Mankiewicz, even though he lived mostly back east.
And Joe Mankiewicz was responsible for.
Joe's Herman's younger brother, All About Eve, Letter to Three Wives. Cleopatra, sort of famously, is his famous failure.
No. Anyway, your life has taken on this sort of robust Hollywood quality in as much as people recognize you and associate you with movies, and now you're working in the movie world.
Yeah, there's plenty of people working in Hollywood today, still working, who have a sort of venerate TCM that means something to them. So because they value these movies and the great work that TCM does and the channel means something to them, they associate me with that, and it's nice. I feel sort of sheepish about it because it feels accidental because it's the movies and the channel they love, but it's nice, yeah.
And even though it is accidental, you do take it seriously, so I don't begrudge you like I would most people.
I take it super seriously, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's to be appreciated. But there are moments where I go, wow, Ben's life is pretty, and, like when Mel Brooks calls you, and on the phone he calls you. He doesn't like call you from across a restaurant. He does that too.
Yeah, it is. The thing of it is, none of it's worn off. I badly want to call people afterwards, like you, and like Michael and other friends, and be like, Mel Brooks just called on the phone just to chat. Right? Like, what is going on? But I always feel like, is this name dropping at its worst? But I'm not dropping it. I know you all will be like, I can't believe Mel Brooks calling me on the phone. Right?
No, I wish...
I look at the phone when it's happening. I'm like, what do I say now? Right?
I wish you would call me every single... I love it because it's not going to happen to me. So happening to you is as close as it's going to get to happening to me. I'll tell a story to my dear audience. I met Matthew Modine on the set of Good Day L.A. I was filling in for the host of Good Day L.A. So I'm hosting Good Day L.A. and Matthew Modine is there. Now, Matthew Modine, in addition to being a great actor, his politics and my politics and our outlook on the environment and a lot of things, absolutely congruent. It's great to see that repped so often. He's put his name behind movies that represent environmentalism and all this other stuff. And so I respect him in a lot of ways that have nothing to do with acting. And I said at the end of the interview, hey, I'd love to get you on the podcast. You could call in or whatever. So we exchange a bunch of emails, and we exchange emails, and our email exchanges are not just short. They're like, he writes a more substantial thing, and we're talking about, this is in the run-up to the election, talking about all this stuff. Anyway, I'll finish up by saying, it's clear to me that Matthew Modine is not going to come on my podcast, not even call in, right? He's like shining me on in a weird way, like not really shining me on, but sort of I get the idea after a while. So I stop emailing him. I'm not going to be
Right.
So then I see on Twitter that Matthew Modine is like a guest programmer on TCM.
Yeah.
And then I tell Ben what I've just told you, my dear audience. And Ben says, that would probably happen. And we become pretty good friends. And I could probably, maybe I could come on with him or something like that. The way that we would make it happen maybe is that. And I thought, wow. How about that? I'm groveling like an asshole to try to get Matthew Modine on my podcast, and Ben just didn't, TCM.
Yeah, the celebrity world, it's a weird world. First of all, he's literally like the nicest celebrity, and as I'm sure you experience, like he's an unbelievably kind guy.
Even when he's not coming on your show.
Even when he's not coming on your show. Yeah. But of course, it's hard for him to distinguish, like they get asked so many things,
sure.
Right? And there's a constant pull. But there is one of the best things happened with me and Matt. We, by the way, I'm wildly overstating it. But he's the kind of person who you meet and you instantly think, I really hope he wants to be my friend because I want to be his, right?
Sure.
And nothing has happened to suggest that that's happened. He's still
right. A couple of Dodgers games.
Right, a couple of Dodgers games, yeah. He's throwing my wife and I like a 4-year wedding anniversary. Doesn't matter. That's probably going to be at his home back east. No, none of that is true. So
Ben did say to me, he lives back east, so it might be hard for him. And I'm going, yeah, I know he lives back east.
That's why you were like, you can call in,
Right. Maybe their own phones back east.
But I was talking to him about Stanley Kubrick, right? Because
sure, Stanley Kubrick did Full Metal Jacket,
right? And he played Joker in Full Metal Jacket, and anyway, he was so thoughtful about the way he answered questions. And when you do interviews for a living, and you sort of start taking yourself too seriously and believing that it is an art, and I think it is, that there is an art to it, and there are obviously people who are better at it than others, and I really want to be very good at it. I take it seriously. Then he does the thing that so rarely happens with the stars of his magnitude. He thought about his answers. So you ask a question and there isn't an answer right away from people who are very good at giving answers right away. And then you have to remember to let that silence exist. I don't know whether I can't remember whether they probably edited it out, right? But to me, it was great that he was ruminating before answering. So, and instantly that was why, to me, that's like she's probably, I mean, if he's not the best guest programmer we've had, he's at the top tier. He's a top 5 guest programmer just because he was so interesting and thoughtful and kind in his assessment of acting and then informative. Like I felt afterwards, wow, I learned something. So he'd be a great guest if you could get him.
Since he's not going to come on the show, can I ask you some Matthew Modine questions? One that comes to mind, because you mentioned Stanley Kubrick. Did he talk about being cast in Full Metal Jacket?
He did. I don't fully remember his answer or his story.
See, if Matthew's listening, I would remember your answer. Ben's got to make room for Mel Brooks, who's coming in, okay?
Yes, he was incredibly nervous about it. As I recall, he drove out to his home out here in Southern California. And like a bunch of Kubrick comes out with a bunch of dogs. So it was just, and he's like wearing shorts and a T-shirt. And he's so instantly sort of disarmed by the informality of this. And I don't think he ever read. I think Kubrick talked to him enough and talked to him about the character that he thought, this guy.
That's great. Yeah. We don't need him now. That was great. That was terrific.
I'm pretty sure that story is probably 88% true. It's going to turn out he read for it in a sterile room.
Yeah.
It wasn't even casting director. It wasn't even Kubrick. Never met him. No, I recall the meeting Kubrick story. He called him. He was very, and others have too, that he was very clear on the Kubrick.
Oh,
and I say Kubrick, and I don't know. It made me. I was sure that Kubrick was right, and then you hear him and somebody else who knows him say Kubrick, and I remember I meant to ask him, "Hey, am I getting this wrong?" But I forgot. And no one's called me out on it, so we'll see.
I could play the game that we often play with Michael Shore,
which is Matthew Modine is alive.
I'm gonna. Then you'll probably appreciate and be able to answer where this comes from.
Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
Play it again, please.
Yeah, I'll play just a little bit, and then I'll play. But once I play the second part, you'll get it.
Right.
Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
That first word is Marine, right?
Yeah. Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
That is, I guess, is that from Full Metal Jacket? No, that's my.
That would be the obvious play to
right,
play.
It seems like, yeah, but it must be from Marine. What is? I don't know. What's it from?
Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
A peace symbol, sir.
Where'd you get it?
It's from Patton? No?
Not yet. I'm going to encourage you to reset, reboot. Okay? Don't overthink it.
All right.
Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
A peace symbol, sir.
Where'd you get it?
I don't remember, sir.
What is that you've got written on your helmet?
Born to kill, sir.
You write born to kill on your helmet, and you wear a peace button. What's that supposed to be? Some kind of sick joke?
No, sir.
What is it supposed to mean?
I don't know, sir.
You don't know very much, do you?
No, sir.
You better get your head and your ass wired together, or I will take a giant shit on you.
Yes, sir.
Now answer my question, or you'll be standing tall before the man.
I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir.
The what?
The duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
Whose side are you on, son?
Our side, sir.
Don't you love your country?
Yes, sir.
Then how about getting with the program? Why don't you jump on the team and come on in for the big win?
Yes, sir.
Son, all I've ever asked of my Marines is for them to obey my orders as they would the word of God. We are here to help the Vietnamese because inside every gook there is an American trying to get out. It's a hardball world, son. We've got to try to keep our heads until this peace craze blows over.
Aye, aye, sir.
Obviously, that is, and the band played on.
That is Full Metal Jacket, and that's
Yeah.
Matthew Modine, obviously. And I just love that sequence.
So that's it's funny, the reason why I was less certain at the beginning is that to me does not sound like Arlie Ermy, but I guess it is.
It's not. It's a scene. You're right.
I'm comforted that that's not Arlie.
Yeah, the second part of the film, once he goes to Vietnam, that's that sequence. There's a general there who sees him, and they have that exchange. So it's not the drill sergeant, which is at the beginning of the movie, which is the first part of the movie.
So do we know who that is? Who's the character?
Here, I'll find it.
It's such a great moment. I'd completely, we talked about Full Metal Jacket in that, but we didn't screen Full Metal Jacket. We didn't have that,
Yeah.
if I'm remembering correctly. But, and Arlie Ermy was so good, and but he's at Paris Island.
Right.
Arlie Ermy, all his scenes are at Paris Island.
Yeah, he's the first part of the movie.
And now he hosts like a gun show where essentially he's playing that character as the host of the show, but he's himself.
Actually, we stopped the show down for a few minutes so we could find out who played the role of the colonel in Vietnam. I thought he was a general, but he's a colonel in Vietnam.
So that's an actor named Bruce Boa, 57 years old at the time, died in 2004. He's Canadian, died in England at the age of 73. He was in Star Wars episode, so he was in The Empire Strikes Back, and he was in, it looks like he was a general in The Empire Strikes Back, played a general in Octopussy, and he played a colonel, so he had a thing, right? He military officers, yeah.
He is not going to be on the podcast either because he's passed away. God.
He was in the Bill Murray remake of The Razor's Edge. Speaking of my family, he was in an episode of Heart to Heart.
Oh, yeah, your uncle.
And by the way, you were asking about TCM, my cousin, Tom Mankiewicz.
Cousin, sorry.
Yeah. But he was older, seemed like an uncle. Yeah. Joe Mankiewicz's son, Tom. So speaking of preparation, for next, that included in my next trip to Atlanta is introing 15 movies, William Holden movies, with Stephanie Powers.
Oh, wow.
Who was, his partner, his romantic partner for the last 9 years of his life, and they shared an enthusiasm for conservation and animals and environmentalism. And again, you think that you can talk, at least for me, what I've learned is that unless I've seen a movie recently or it's Casablanca, it is, if I want to talk about it lucidly and in a way that can prompt something good out of the guest, I really need to see it again. So I'm looking at the list so it's 15 William Holden movies that I need to see. Well, that's 30 hours, and that's assuming you watch them straight through. I take some notes during it, so that's a week, right, of just watching movies if you want to do it right, and so then when you do other stuff during the day and then you watch 2 movies at night, you're neglecting your family. So but I can't really do it with so I assume you'd think, oh well, I'm the host of TCM, I can talk smartly about Sunset Boulevard, and I could pull it off without having seen Sunset Boulevard again. But, I don't know. I haven't seen it in 15 years, probably, maybe more, right?
By the way, Sunset Boulevard, one of the great movies of all time.
So I watched it again, and every other scene was, oh, I forgot about how good this scene was, right? So if I'm going to sit there with Stephanie Powers and talk about Holden and Sunset Boulevard, I have to rewatch the movie, to say nothing of reading about the movie and reading about Holden, so I can get things out of her because she didn't know him then, right? So I want to get her to say interesting things about Holden. So so that's a whole other week of that's where the preparation goes. And believe me, I'm not complaining, but it makes what used to be like this thing where you flew into Atlanta and all you had to do was you worked on some scripts. Now it's a full-time job. It's more than a full-time job.
Yeah, the interviews and conversations that you now are writing heard over, they definitely have changed the character of the job.
That's right. Yeah, and because the preparation for those, and I don't wing them. I don't, and sometimes obviously I've over prepared. I realize that going in, I didn't need to, but whatever. I'd rather over prepare obviously than under prepare. And I'm not, again, I love doing it. But it is a different experience to watch 15 William Holden movies for work and try and find things in them that are interesting. But you're totally right about Sunset Boulevard. Again, I would have, I because to me, I would have said best Billy Wilder movie, Ace in the Hole, which I love, Kirk Douglas, and from I think the next year, I think it's 51, and it's this again one of these prescient media movies, getting where the media was headed in a way that you just don't imagine people could in 1951, the way Kazan and Bud Schulberg did with Facing the Crowd, and 6 years later, but. You see Sunset Boulevard, and you're like, okay, so stop with the Ace in the Hole nonsense, right? Sunset Boulevard's perfect.
It's brilliant, and I recommend it to everyone for a movie that's a great ride. It gets you from the very first shot, which, by the way, is I think it's a body floating in a pool.
Yeah, sure. It's Holden's narration over the body in the pool, but I don't. Of course, everyone who's seen it knows that it's Holden. I don't think you can recognize that the person in the pool is Holden at the beginning. Right?
Absolutely not.
No. It is. So it's still dramatically a surprise.
For
first timers. When I'm introing it, I got to be careful not to say.
To tip it.
Like the one they sent me. It really said, we learned right at the beginning that the narrator William Holden is dead, and I think no, I don't. I don't think we should tell them that because they won't know who that person is.
Yeah, that seems like a mistake. But the other thing I was going to say is, just quickly, because I know that those who aren't into classic movies have moved on to listen to the Joe Rogan podcast now or something. I would say
does Joe Rogan have a podcast?
The story is, I think at its core, the question of selling out. And it's something that we all face, no matter what you do, whether you're an actor doing a commercial or a product placement person, or if you're even working on the assembly line, like where on the assembly line? In other words, where does your backbone kick in and go, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm about this. I'm about my art. I'm about my family. I'm about my whatever. I think it's a movie about selling out at its core.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's why it becomes relatable. I don't think he's sold out, right? I mean, I think that when you're a writer, you take writing jobs. This was a writing job, and it was a way to him to, get even, catch up, right? Pay off his car, pay off his apartment, be able to stay. And then, of course, at some point, he does recognize that he's gone too far.
Well, they make the point, because I would agree with you, of course, but they make the point when he's at the party, as I recall, and in other words, he sees the people who he'd like to be hanging out with. He sees the environment that he'd like to be involved in more, but because he's made this pact with the devil, which is to take this writing job for this fated star, right? Mm-hmm. I think that points up that he's made the compromise, and he may have realized it too late.
Right. Well, obviously he realized it too late, but it doesn't feel like it's too late. I mean, right, you don't know that she's got a snap in that her sort of disassociation will sort of become violent, and her break with reality, her psychotic break will become so great at that point, as this young, incredibly handsome guy walks out on her. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
and of course, nobody saw it because even Eric von Stroheim doesn't see it. Like, nobody thinks he's actually, like, you almost expect von Stroheim then to protect her.
He plays the butler, or if you
Right.
were
a great silent director. There's, of course, the irony in him playing that role is that he's playing a guy who was a great silent director who's now a butler for a former and faded silent star.
Yeah, you're right. That's a wrinkle on a
So
wrinkle.
he doesn't again, you might expect him to sort of suggest something, but in no way does he try to protect her. Like, he's like, oh, the gig is up. She's murdered somebody.
Yeah.
She's shot a man in the back who was just trying to go home and lead his life.
All he does, I believe, with the last shot.
He's a director once again.
Right.
Yeah.
He directs her last
He
walk.
directs her walk down the staircase and the famous last line in the
Now,
movie.
you see,
for my close-up.
Ben, I haven't seen the movie in 12 years, and you can see I can speak quite well about it. So
Yeah, totally. But
I think you may be overworking, is what I'm getting at.
But where it is, I blame it on seeing so many movies. But I think it's just the way my brain works. Stuff doesn't stay in as long. I mean, there are movie fans who can quote all the time. Like, I mean, what I don't want to do is get into quizzes with people about movies because it very rarely ends particularly well for me. And my defense is, hey, you haven't seen 2,500 movies in the last 2 years. Okay. So just chill out. But
right. That's great. Your brother is kind of savantish with remembering dialogue in a movie.
Yeah. And when I had less, I was better at it. I'm less good at it now. I mean, I'm great at it when I've just seen it.
Sure.
But you come back for the same conversation about Sunset Boulevard 6 months from now, and I'll be like, so, and then at the end, does she walk down the stairs, or is she already there? I mean, it's like it all vanishes.
Yeah. So given that, Ben, you can recognize this piece of dialogue, right?
Marine, what is that button on your body armor?
A peace symbol, sir.
What is it?
Sure, that would be that's Full Metal Jacket. That's but it's not Arlie Ermy, Mark.
No, it's from the second part. That's a great grab.
Yeah,
that's from when they're in Vietnam.
That's right. Yeah, it's the Colonel.
No, that's right. Very well done.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so let's quickly give some perspective to what's happening in politics right now. President Trump gave this State of the Union speech. First of all, what a great environment for him. His every utterance gets applause. He enters to a captive room where he is, he's the main man. I mean, it's a narcissist's dream,
Right. And that's true for any narcissist. I mean, it's not like it was more enthusiastic for Trump. In fact, it was less enthusiastic for Trump, but it is enthusiastic and for a guy who is a sort of a dangerous narcissist. Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, it couldn't be better, right? It's a speech designed to give you standing ovations. But it was filled with so many awful, awful moments. And I know that, there's already stories today. Should the Congressional Black Caucus have stood when he said that black, will you not give him a break on anything? Black unemployment is as low as it's ever been. If you divide by race, if you call African countries shitholes, if you say that the white supremacists marching in Charlottesville, they're good people on both sides. If where's my African American, as he said at one point at one rally during the campaign, if he is sort of deliberately, and those are 3 examples of 48 examples where he sort of winked at racists. Then when you take credit for policies implemented under, whether it's a Democrat or a reasonable administration with competent people in it, and then you try to take credit for something, no, they should not stand. Absolutely, they should not stand. I think they should walk out. I mean, I think it would be okay if they walked out. But you're supposed to stand up to people like this all the time and not give him political wins. That's the danger of this, and the danger of a consistent media narrative from many good, honest, well-meaning Americans that, well, you can't criticize him all the time. No, he must be criticized all the time, 100% of the time, because he is always a con man. And sometimes con men con you.
You mentioned not applauding or even walking out. There was talk by certain members of the Democratic Party that they were not going to attend. In fact, I think a handful of them did not attend.
Yeah, more than you. Maxine, speaking of the Congressional Black Caucus, a bunch didn't. I know Maxine Waters didn't. I know Frederica Wilson didn't, and there were others.
Is there a danger in that, or do you think that, as you say, no, that's what you need to do?
I think you need to do it. Of course, there's a danger in it. Anytime you take a political stand, there's a danger in it. I mean, and it's not to say that all stands are good. Sometimes it will hurt you politically. Certainly, their seats are safe. They're not going to lose. But, you lose stature in the eyes of, again, a country that is desperate for both sides to work together. This notion and
that's
yes,
really what I'm getting
under
at.
normal circumstances, yeah, we all want that. But one side has left the reservation, and there are 1,000, 10,000 valid criticisms of the Democrats abandoning their base and abandoning working class people of all races, and not standing up for workers and letting this country become totally non-unionized and de-unionized. But the Republican Party is not interested in governing, and the notion that you're supposed to work together all the time, no, you're not. I was with a very smart guy yesterday, an 80-year-old guy, and a really successful guy, and his whole thing was, again, everybody wants to reset to they're extremists on the right and they're extremists on the left, and we got to get people in the center who will make a deal. And I said, in arguing with him till nearly blue in the face, there aren't guys in that party who will make a deal. And the people who you refer to as extremists on the left have no power. And the extremists on the right are running the country. So where's this deal? And who should make this deal? And it is just, to miss that is to miss what has happened politically in the United States over the last 30 years, and certainly since 1994, certainly over the last 25 years.
There's a character to this administration as well, which seems to be about winning, so that after you make a deal, like if you want to call it a deal, I guess it was a deal to keep the doors of the government open for 3 weeks. The president jumps on Twitter and jumps on, I think, even sort of an informal press conference environment. He does a touchdown dance. He does a victory dance. He talks about the fact that, hey, I got Schumer. I own Schumer. Of course, the Democrats took a big loss. So he doesn't really incentivize making a deal anyway.
I mean, no, you can't make a deal with Elmer Gantry. You don't make a deal with con men. And that's it. Elmer Gantry, Burt Lancaster as Elmer Gantry gave some great speeches. And if he'd been a politician, a zillion people would have said, this is the day Elmer Gantry became president, right? No, he's still a con man, and he will con you in the end.
There is a quality of teleprompter Trump that's different from Twitter Trump and extemporaneous Trump. And so we were on teleprompter Trump last night, and I was waiting for that moment. And sure enough, it came when, wow, he's finally made the pivot, or he's finally presidential, or this is the kind of thing that shows that this country really may be evolving with this president. He's read the prompter, which was a speech written by someone else. Sure, it notes a bunch of things about his administration, many of which are not true.
Most of which are not true.
And it used effectively the props in the crowd,
But everybody does it.
Exactly.
Certainly Barack Obama did
Obama did it as well. My point is it was well crafted from that standpoint.
Sure, it was. Yes, I mean, if his goal was to get people who've criticized him to say, wow, he was great, well, then it worked. And I would only say to those people that you need to be more careful, that you're getting used a little bit here. And that once you decide that this guy is massively unfit for office and dangerous, you don't give him political wins. You don't, because they're playing politics. I love politics. I got it. I admire that. But as you were watching this speech, as horrible as I thought it was, as demonizing of immigrants, to compare Dreamers to MS-13 and to say, this is about America and Americans, and it was horrible. It was awful. It was propaganda that makes us feel like we are threatened by others. So I don't think afterwards you go, oh man, this is the day he became president. But people can't help themselves. Yeah, and one of these guys, real quick, Frank Luntz, who I, again, he's a GOP, he's a GOP consultant, pollster, but a very good one, but an interesting guy.
And he does post stuff that seems fairly neutral occasionally.
He's been pretty critical of Trump, but he couldn't help himself last night. And this is the example of, to me, sort of falling for Elmer Gantry. Tonight, I owe Donald Trump an apology. Tonight, I was moved and inspired. Tonight, I have hope and faith in America again. It may go away tomorrow, but tonight, America is great again. Yeah, well, I mean, that's this.
I saw that same tweet from him in real time, and I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I say that with all respect, because we do have some Trump supporters who listen to this show.
Have you ever had Frank Luntz on?
I haven't. I'd love to have him on. And I guess what I would say to him is, Frank, you're in love with a speech. It was written by somebody else. It integrated some tried and true aspects of State of the Union speeches, and he delivered it solidly. I mean, I wouldn't say he was a great orator by any means, but the idea somehow that you can get drunk on that moment and then make this comment, and it reflects.
If you want to say this was a well-crafted speech and my polling experience tell me this is going to help Trump politically, that's what interesting analysis, no question, right? And he'd get vilified for that by some on the left. But that would be, but again, you've just bought in. You got tricked. You already know that he's a huckster. He's a grifter. And if you know it and then be like, wow, he dazzled me tonight. Yes, that's what they do. And then the mainstream press, as always, again, which is filled with the people who give us information on the Young Turks and give you information to do this podcast, and this is what we read, and God bless them. But as a body, the idea of pivoting and sort of having it have everyone come to the center is so sort of is innate in their behavior, and they can't get out of the way of it. I'm listening to this wonderful podcast, not obviously as good as this one, but this Slow Burn podcast.
Oh, yeah, it's about the Watergate.
The Watergate thing. It's so great, man. Everybody should listen to Slow Burn, Slate's podcast on Watergate. It's finished. But the desire when Nixon had a couple of nuclear treaties with the Soviet Union in 1972, and then he opened up China, the idea of Nixon, the statesman, was, it's a large reason why he won by 23 points, beating George McGovern, who's, my father ran George McGovern's campaign, why he trounced McGovern. But the media was so desperate for this sort of mean-spirited, petty, smart, but little man that Nixon had always been. Even then, they were like, where's the new Nixon? Where's the new Nixon? Which is another reason why Watergate got no traction prior to the election, because this other narrative of the new Nixon turning toward the middle. They were desperate to that story. They loved that story. Even if they don't wake up in the morning thinking I love that story, you can't help but now read it and think, oh, they all want to tell the story. And they want to tell it with Trump, too. That's what Luntz's tweet, which has 47,000 likes and 14,000 retweets and 13,000 comments. That's why it worked. They love that narrative. And then the criticism comes to Democrats. Well, so you're just going to oppose him on everything? And the answer should be yes, everything. He is dangerous for this country, and the right thing to do is to oppose him, unless he does something that is truly good, like an actual infrastructure bill that doesn't privatize roads, but the government investing in. But they think government doesn't work. So they think government's broken, so that's not likely to happen.
Now, the GOP wants to privatize everything. They really do. And I say everything, I understand that overstates it. But when you've talked about privatizing our military endeavors, which is a very serious threat, and Eric Prince, who ran Blackwater, who ran the private army that we've already contracted out to once, he wants to do it again. It's not happening in a secretive way. It's happening in an upfront way. And Trump, to his credit, I use the phrase advisedly, he also was up front. He felt things should be privatized from air traffic control to the infrastructure. If ever there was something that you were going to soak the American taxpayers for, it's an infrastructure plan that is then privatized to contractors, all of whom have relationships with government.
They have successfully, it's one reason why Democrats are in such a bind when the government stops, because you can't really just keep, if your whole argument is that the government works for you and does good things for you, which I believe, and also wastes money, by the way, right? And everybody wants it to be effective, right? And cost effective. But when you try things, some things aren't going to work, right? So,
by the way, let me just interject here. There's no greater waste of money than at the Pentagon, and
right,
now we have raised.
But we don't look at that.
Exactly.
That one's off limits. So. Yeah, so you're in a bind when the government shuts down, and you want to say, "Hey, we're the party that where government works." So yeah, you're sort of hence the eagerness to get government working again. And polls will show that people don't want the government to shut down. I mean, as much as Americans are in favor of dreamers, Americans were not in favor of shutting down the government for dreamers, and that's what Democrats reacted to. Again, I would say that that's a stand that they ought to have taken anyway. But yeah, Republicans want to have municipalities essentially sell bridges and roads to private companies who will then pave them and fix them, and then they're going to need to recoup that money. And the way they're going to recoup that money is through tolls. And so you're going to be paying private companies fees to drive on the roads. And that's insane to me. Like, no, government, they make the roads work and they make the traffic lights work, and we don't privatize that.
That's what your taxes go to.
Right. That's what they should go to. And I'm not saying it's the exact same thing, but, Cape Town is going to run out of water, right? In South Africa, which is a western city in South Africa. They privatized the water, and there's now no water. And it's an environmental issue more than a privatization issue, but it's both. But again, you don't privatize that. You get municipalities are supposed to competently manage the water supply.
And back to the military example, Blackwater, as you know, had private contractors in Iraq who shot up a town, and the recourse is limited. The directive is much more limited, meaning you don't really have control over this private contractor. You may say you have control as government, but you don't really. And so privatization has philosophical problems as well as financial problems.
Yeah, I mean, when the stock market is at 26,000 or whatever gigantic number it's at, I mean, I don't know what our giant worry here is about corporate America. Corporate America they do employ people. Like, God, I don't want to ever be mistaken. Like, I'm a capitalist, right? But you can't privatize everything. There's plenty of things that are already privatized. Business is privatized. All of it. It's all privatized. Sporting goods, privatized. Home building, privatized. There are certain things that the government's supposed to do, and they're supposed to run the schools and pave the roads, and the government, and only the government, is supposed to operate the military.
Donald Trump, he's already surrendered his White House and policy over to a bunch of guys like Stephen Miller and those of his ilk who are making policy for him, and Trump just signs and shows up to photo ops.
Pruitt and Rex Tillerson, who we praise because he's not a madman. It is the worst choice in the history of America for any cabinet position, that a guy who ran ExxonMobil, a company that had its own private army, for crying out loud, and viewed the State Department as barriers to getting things done, is now in charge of the State Department. It's a joke. Yeah. And I think that will long-term be borne out.
Although, I honestly, I really don't know how you decide who's the worst.
No,
Scott Pruitt.
Jeff Sessions, Rex Tillerson.
Governor with the Department of
Rick Perry. Chris
Perry.
Kobach running the nonsensical voter fraud thing, even though it's not a cabinet-level position. Yeah, we decided during the State of the Union live sort of play-by-play that we do on the Young Turks last night that Elaine Chao and there was one guy who was that Elaine Chao, that Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, whose nickname is Mad Dog, but he's not crazy. That's why. And Nikki Haley are people who could have been given jobs under John Kasich, right?
Right.
They're not psychotic. They're not crazy. They're not trying to, those three are in competition for not horrible. But that's the best you can say about any of them.
The cutaways of Mnuchin and for the rest of these.
Wilbur Ross. You know.
And Gorsuch. I mean, God, they cut away and he did the whole wet kiss to Gorsuch during the during. I mean, that was,
and like Elena Kagan seemed to be. You're allowed to smile, like you don't.
Right.
Like we don't clap, but when they're saying "Welcome to the Supreme Court," you can move your head.
Yeah.
But Gorsuch was like, not doing anything.
No, right.
I am not breaking character.
I don't want to F this up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't think he's going to make a deal on immigration. I really don't.
No, he took the Dreamers hostage and then says for $25 billion and every right-wing wet dream about extreme right-wing wet dream about immigration, I'll release the hostages that I took when I didn't have to take them. So he took hostages, and then for $25 billion for a wall, he said Mexico was going to build. Not once, but in every speech he mentioned immigration. How many times do you think he mentioned Mexico is going to pay for that wall?
Yeah, hundreds.
Maybe 1,000, but easily 400, easily. And then all of a sudden he's asking $25 billion. We can't make college affordable or free. Let's shop short of free, affordable, cheap. But we can pay for a wall that no serious person thinks we need for $25 billion that you claimed another country was going to pay for. And for that, the Dreamers can stay. And the host of other horrible and an end to legal immigration and misusing chain migration, which is family reunification.
Yeah.
And saying all these things and reducing legal immigration. And again, this sort of David Duke loved that speech, Frank Luntz, right? And Frank Luntz is a good. I disagree with him about everything, but there is a decency to him, and so I think don't like the same speech David Duke likes. That's how you know you're getting tricked. So for that, Trump will release the hostages that he took. Man, that's what a grifter does.
What about you agree in principle, you get him to kind of what Dianne Feinstein suggested in that public meeting where he kind of in real time, you were watching a conversation with Trump in which he goes, yeah, I'm for that. We'll break out the Dreamers separately. We'll do that. And then we'll make a deal on immigration. And then, of course, when he got back with the people who are really making policy, they said, no, we're not going to do that.
We're not going to say, we're going to make sure we get things out of this. We're going to put pressure on them. So, yeah, I mean, Cenk, the host of the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, his argument is that, you play politics with it every day, and every day on the floor of the House, you trot out another family that has been separated, another dreamer. And, and I was mad, and I was saying, who's going to cover that? And he says, you make CNN cover it, you make the New York Times cover it. And I'm sure they would to some extent. But when you were the minority party, you lose. And when it is something that Democrats want because they want government to work and they're in a bind and they won't stand up together. They won't, Bernie Sanders' speech last night was excellent. Did you watch it?
I didn't. I watched the Joe Kennedy speech,
which I thought was nice, and I'm glad they did it with an audience.
Right.
Mostly because I've been saying that for 16 years.
Well, because to that point, it's such a contrast. You watch this incredible speech where Trump is just bathed in applause and this august body has collected, and then you go to the response, regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat.
And it's horrible.
It's so dry and there's no audience.
Gary Locke, the governor of Washington, it was the worst ever. He's a Democrat.
There's a lot of competition for the worst ever.
Yeah, but I believe his was worse than Marco Rubio's.
Okay.
Yeah, and Marco Rubio was thirsty. It happens. But I thought Joe Kennedy's was fine. We had a lot of criticism on the Young Turks, mostly the three other people, about his very political cadence.
Yes.
It seemed...
It was studied.
It was practiced, yeah. But then Bernie went and he spoke as what looked to be like if you were on CNN with a background of the Capitol and sitting down like at a studio, which is way better than the way they sort of push in and so you didn't see his legs or anything. It's just... And he read off a teleprompter and it was pretty good. I mean, it broke up in the middle and the feed went down and they had to... He was like, yeah, technology, it's great when it works. But he laid into Trump and called out lies. And that's the kind of behavior that Democrats struggle with, right? They are not. And then he mixed it in with a nice mix of his own vision. So I thought it was excellent. And, to what many on the left, far left, object to, he was like, I think it's interesting that you didn't mention Russian interference in our, maybe that's because you're in some way beholden to them. And I was like, to me, it was Bernie saying, I hear all of you Democrats who think this is a big deal, and I'm with you. But to me, that was the biggest sign. I'm like, oh, that guy is looking to broaden his base as he runs for president again.
And he will be 80?
I think 79, I think, yeah. Same age as Biden.
Yeah.
And only a couple years younger than Trump.
Right, and I would say a couple years older than Trump.
Oh, a couple years older than Trump. Trump only a few years younger than him, yeah.
But, and I would say in a party that's desperate for a guy who's a plain speaker, authentic, and really tells it straight.
Yeah,
it may be the lifeboat they have to jump on.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely has in Trump's faux authentic nature. I mean, there is something authentic about Trump, and he has a political magic. But yeah, I voted for Bernie in the
general election,
in the primaries, and supported him, and then made the very easy transfer over to Hillary, which for many has that's sold out. Somehow.
Yeah, that's damnable for
right.
a lot of people.
I wish he were 7 years younger. Badly wish he were 7 years younger.
Yeah.
So we'll see. That's every candidate has hurdles, and Biden and Bernie have. That's one of their hurdles is getting past their age. But I think if you still seem sharp at the time, then that might be okay.
I also would say they should. My advice would be to be smart and strategic about a campaign schedule. One of the things that it brutalizes these candidates is this schedule. It's just crazy. You're running for president for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and you're making all these stops. I mean, not to say you don't have to make stops, but there are other ways to do it.
Right. I mean, you're right. No, travel is hard, and travel is harder when you're 79. That's just no question. That's not every 79-year-old is the same. But I'm just also curious what other Democratic candidate will attempt, and again, this will be their hurdle, to be a young Bernie. Like, we'll talk those same issues, and the left doesn't trust Cory Booker at all. They either don't trust or are very dubious of Kamala Harris. But will one of them, Booker almost can't do it, but will Harris try to embrace those issues and then present herself as a, younger version of Bernie? But it will not, but that said, it will, for millions, it will not seem authentic if she does.
Booker can't because he's a manifest sellout?
Because the belief, I think he can't let me rephrase that. I think he could. I think anybody can. I think you give 10 straight speeches where you go, yeah, I was beholden to Wall Street. That was a mistake. I'm not now, right? I see the problem. I'm going to regulate the hell out of them, and I don't care if they never give me another dollar.
Right.
What happens if you
asked
say that?
and answered?
Just do it. See what happens. So, but I don't think he will. And but I think that a skilled politician can sell that point. But these guys got to have chops. Like, this is not. You got to have the ability to convince people that you mean what you say, and seeming to be plain spoken and legitimately being plain spoken, like Bernie, goes a long way. Cenk's point would be that when you sound like Joe Kennedy, you can't deliver that message, even though as recently as 5 years ago that was what we thought
everybody spoke like. Yeah,
right. So who recognizes? But I don't want it to just be stylistic. He has to mean it. Because if it turns out he's secretly taking money from them or meeting with them, but if he scares them to the point where you hear Jamie Dimon saying, "We are very disappointed in Cory Booker," well, then you're going to start winning some people. Right now, I know a zillion people on the left would say never, and that I'm an establishment sellout. But I think a skilled politician can do it. I don't know whether they will, but I think they could.
Ben Mankiewicz, thank you for sharing a little bit with us. Love the movie stuff. Love the TCM. I have the TCM app, which I watch on my phone occasionally.
It's a very good app. Do you have Filmstruck?
Don't think I do, no.
Filmstruck is the Turner's first over-the-top streaming service, OTT, as we say in the business.
Yeah.
And for, I don't know, 10, 12, I don't know what the price is, bucks a month, you get the entire Criterion collection. Which is just so these are
on demand,
and now the Warner Archive is coming to Filmstruck, which means I'm going to start hosting on Filmstruck. I had not been, but now I will start hosting there too.
God, you have said there's so many outlets that are requiring your attention as a host. You'd think they might need another host. I'm just saying.
I will not let them do that. No, that's happening as well. So Dave Karger is going to be hosting.
He's the noir guy.
No, that's Eddie Muller.
That's Eddie.
And that's, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. I think that's getting expanded.
Oh, great.
Or at least they're going to run it twice a week, and then and Dave Karger is going to host during 31 Days of Oscar coming up in February, and then another host is coming. We got other people coming, but Filmstruck for movie lovers, foreign films and art house movies, all this great stuff in the Criterion collection is unquestionably worth it. I know there are a ton of streaming services, but But Filmstruck is, I would say, should be at the top of any film lover's list.
Well, you say there are a ton of streaming services. The truth is that many of those streaming services, I'm thinking of Netflix, there are a lot of holes.
Yeah, they've purged most of the classic library. And, Amazon has a ton of these great movies, but you got to pay for them each time. But here at Filmstruck, if you're watching 3 classic movies a month, a classic meaning, again, foreign, art house, but then all the stuff at Warner Archive. From Here to Eternity, Casablanca, like sort of the classic movies are sort of that we have on Filmstruck are going to be signature classic movies. But going all the way from, like I said, The Thin Man and then up through, John Cassavetes. So, but unquestionably, Filmstruck is really sort of well curated, well crafted. And I didn't expect to promote it here, but for any movie lover, it's a worthy over the top service.
Ben Mankiewicz, everybody, come on. Thanks, Ben. Hope you enjoyed the conversation with Ben. The email address, if you want to reach us about anything, edgewithmarkthompson@gmail.com. edgewithmarkthompson@gmail.com. Thanks for being here, and until next time, bye-bye.
Oh, okay. It's just something. There we go. Yeah. I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. And if you haven't already, why don't you show your support and subscribe? What's the matter with you? Go to Edge Show. Oh, it's Edge Dash. What's with the dash? Stupid. All right, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. Show your support and leave something on their website, edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is there a dash?
edge-show.com.